Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We're honored to have with us John Zmirak. He wrote the article, Gay Totalitarianism and the Coming Persecution of Christians. We put that up last week at joemiller.us. Got a lot of traction, several thousand reads, almost 1,000 Facebook likes. It also went viral throughout the country. Hardcore topic, one that creates some controversy. John Zmirak is the senior editor of thestream.org. He went to my alma mater, received his BA from Yale University in 86, received his MFA in screenwriting and fiction and his PhD in English in 96 from Louisiana State University. He's a writer, taught composition, has written screenplays. He also was an elected and alternate delegate to the 96 Republican Convention representing Pat Buchanan, has been a press secretary to pro-life Louisiana Governor Mike Foster, has worked and is currently working for pro-life groups, active and engaged, trying to be an agent of positive change in the culture wars. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So this article that you put out, I mean, it's pretty hardcore. A friend of mine sent it to me. We put it up at joemiller.us with your permission. We reposted the whole article. But I want you just to walk our audience through kind of what motivated you to write it, what its theme is, and then we can kind of walk into some future implications to the United States of the gay agenda.
Sure. 2 years ago, I was on the wrong side of this issue. I thought that fighting gay marriage was not going to work, that it was simply too popular an issue, and that people were following maybe a libertarian principle that, you should have a freedom of association and a freedom of contract. So if two people of the same sex want to get married, well, doesn't our Constitution say that they have that individual right? I didn't believe that, but I thought that had some political power, and it would overwhelm the legitimate Christian and natural law arguments against same-sex marriage and its effects on children and society. So I suggested that we do sort of a grand compromise. We'll allow gay marriage if you exempt all Christians from having to recognize it and from having any kind of legal penalty. And I also suggested that covenant marriages, which are real marriages that don't have no-fault divorce loopholes, be enacted into law at the same time, so that let's follow freedom of contract. If you guys want to have a same-sex marriage, we should be allowed to have a real Christian marriage that would be enforceable by the state. Well, boy, that did not work out very well. It turns out that the gay agenda is not for freedom of association. It's not about freedom at all. It's, in fact, about forcibly imposing not just recognition, but enthusiastic acceptance of homosexual behavior on every single person in the country, on the point of legal fines, maybe imprisonment, and now we see attempts at bankrupting people, driving them out of business. You look at that poor pizzeria in Indiana. They don't cater weddings at all. Some reporter tracked them down, figured out they were Christian, called them up, and posed a ludicrous hypothetical question: what if two gay men wanted to have their wedding catered with pizzas? Now, that's really going to happen. But then the person on the phone at the pizza parlor answered a hypothetical question. Well, I don't think we'd want to do that because we're Christians. And suddenly they're getting death threats. They get a teacher at school wrote on Facebook, we should go burn that pizzeria down. You see Apple, the CEO of Apple, threatening to bankrupt the state of Indiana. You see Walmart, which you used to see as a conservative force, demanding that Arkansas get rid of its religious freedom law. It is astonishing. The gays are not going to settle for gay marriage. They're not going to settle for anything short of absolute acceptance and legal punishment for anyone who dares to speak against them.
We had Dr. Ryan Anderson on the show from the Heritage Foundation a few days ago, and he was talking about Indiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act that, of course, then ended up getting gutted effectively by follow-on legislation that Governor Pence signed into law. But the reaction to that law that effectively has been adopted by 30 other states by either legislation or by court action, the reaction was just unbelievable. It was as if something new had been passed, something that was going to infringe upon homosexual rights. They basically won that through their vitriol and in fact, pressured everybody in Indiana to reverse course. Do you think that the American people as a whole, which side are they on? Do you have a finger on the pulse of American public opinion with respect to this issue?
Well, I'm afraid that we're losing the public because the idea that once we accept gay marriage, this is all inevitable. I was completely wrong in my idea 2 years ago. Once you accept that there is a legitimacy to same-sex marriage, then it does seem to follow you can't discriminate against people. They're married under law. The state has recognized it. Who are you to discriminate against them? So I think that if we give up on same-sex marriage, we lost the battle. And I don't think these religious exemption laws will do us much good at all. I mean, you see, even without the law, in the city of San Francisco, the Archbishop of the city, Coeur de Leon, which means heart of the lion, and he is kind of a lion heart, he decided that at Catholic schools, primary school and high schools, the teachers should have to sign a pledge that they will actually advocate Roman Catholic, which is just to say traditional Christian morality on marriage. In other words, about divorce, abortion, contraception, and yes, homosexuality is one of many issues in which the Catholic Church has a specific teaching that's been around for 2,000 years. You had the city manager of the city of San Francisco send him an intimidating letter demanding that he stop this. You've had teachers rallying outside the diocese. You've had all sorts of threatened legal action. Even in a private religious school. In New Jersey, one teacher wrote something opposed to same-sex marriage on her Facebook page. She worked at a Catholic school. The gay lobby got hold of that. They got the school to fire her, and the bishop of the diocese backed up the gay lobby against the Catholic teacher. We don't even need laws to persecute us. Public opinion is goading businesses and individuals to harass anyone who dares to speak up against the gay agenda. It is absolutely terrifying. People are volunteering to become informers. For the law is, even in states where there is no law protecting sexual orientation from discrimination, people are being harassed. Their businesses are being closed. It is really there's a tsunami building of intolerance towards people who hold traditional Christian moral views.
One of the worries I have, I've always been a strong states' rights advocate. And the reason why is because I've seen for a long time in this country, we're becoming more heterogeneous in views. Worldviews fundamentally are mutually exclusive, adopted at rates that really cast into doubt, the ability to apply one-size-fits-all type solutions. And, of course, the founders intended the states to choose different directions depending on the desires of their resident citizens within the parameters of the federal Constitution. So what you have are a number of states throughout the country where some are applied constitutional amendments against same-sex marriage. In fact, I think most states have done that. But you look at the polling data, like, for example, in Alabama, something like 80%, depending on the poll, opposed to same-sex marriage. Federal courts come in, and they impose then, of course, the will of the gay lobby. They used, hook, line, and sinker, different fictions judicially to get there. And they take away even that outlet that people have at least historically had over the last several decades to go to different areas where they feel more at home with the particular viewpoints. I mean, I think that there is some really heartfelt views that you can probably surround yourself with depending on what state you go to. But even the radicals are infringing on the ability to find a state that suits you, primarily through the federal courts. Where is this headed? I mean, as these laws continue to get imposed, as the public opinion continues to rise in some areas against these views, what ultimately can we see over the next several decades if we don't stop this?
Well, you'll see a country that is completely fractured. What we see with this attempt to federalize every law and to make everything in the country an implication of the 14th Amendment, what we're seeing is the left trying to homogenize, using the force of government, a country of almost 300 million people, trying to impose the values of Greenwich Village and San Francisco on every square inch of Alabama and Texas and Idaho and Wyoming and Utah. And if they succeed by using if they get multi-million-dollar businesses like Apple and Walmart backing up the federal courts, dominating social media, dominating the mainstream media, feeding everyone everywhere an uninterrupted diet of secularist views, they might succeed in undermining the Christian faith of millions of people. I'm glad I don't have teenagers right now, because I wonder what views they'd be soaking in from their school, from the media, from every available outlet, except for a few religious broadcasters who I suspect will lose. Yeah.
John, we got to go to break here, but we'll talk more about that here in just a few minutes. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We're honored to have with us John Zmirak. He's a senior editor of thestream.org, been active in the culture wars. He's a writer, served as a press secretary for a Republican governor, working with pro-life groups, prolific writer, put out an article that we posted at joemiller.us last week entitled Gay Totalitarianism and the Coming Persecution of Christians. We're going to talk a little bit more about that article and the implications of the gay lobby. John, thanks for staying with us.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we were talking about over the break is this Indiana state law that created such a nightmare reaction from gay activists. And I made the comment that, this law was identical, virtually identical, to what has already been enacted at the federal level and has also been enacted by 3/5 of the states, either by legislation or by court action. And yet the gay lobby acted as if the sky had fallen on this. I mean, it was all focus, Indiana targeted, and there was so much pressure applied that the Indiana governor, Governor Mike Pence, caved, created follow-on legislation that essentially gutted the law. So what's going on here? I mean, it just seems surreal, the reaction.
Well, the gay lobby used to be busy trying to fight for same-sex marriage in each of the 50 states. Now they believe the Supreme Court is going to do their work for them and impose its will on all of the 50 states. So they're not bothering to exert their energy on legislative battles anymore. Now they can focus on liquidating. It's like when you conquer a city. First you attack the army. Then when the army is defeated, you mop up and you liquidate the snipers and you wipe out the partisans and you terrorize the population. The gays think that the battle has been won. The Supreme Court, just as it did with abortion, is going to override the laws of 50 states and invent a constitutional right out of thin air and impose it on the 50 states. So they have all their time and energy is freed up. Instead of trying to convince people in legislatures, that work's being done for them. Now they can persecute targets of opportunity, like the state of Indiana, like that poor pizza maker in Indiana, I think it's Heritage Pizza. Now they think they have won the major battle. So you can expect anyone who speaks up against them to be targeted, isolated, and unless we rally and support them, destroyed. I wish Mike Pence had the spine to endure 2 days of attacks on Twitter to give us the chance to rally around him. There wasn't even time to get a counter movement to rally around Indiana before they surrendered. Arkansas surrendered preemptively the moment that Walmart wiggled its little finger. So if we can find one state that's willing to stand up against these people for a few days, maybe Christians could mount a counter boycott. We'll vacation in the next state that stands up. Maybe the Republican National Convention should be moved to whatever state is willing to stand up for religious freedom within its borders. So,
yeah, the problem is, of course, the Republican leadership very frequently waves the white flag of surrender on this issue too. Most of the mainstream Republicans would rather ignore the issue or make it a non-issue because they also smell the winds of public opinion, or at least they think they do. The one thing though that I would say, when you look at, like, for example, the pizzeria in Indiana, the end result of that was a crowdfunding petition, which resulted in significant support. I don't know what they raised. The last time I looked at it, it was several $100,000 to support the pizzeria. I mean, you look at, there are still great people in this country that are very concerned about fundamental freedoms, some of whom may even disagree on the gay marriage issue, but say, look, this country was founded on the ideal of religious freedom, free exercise. It should trump, the gay agenda. And I think that with leadership that can happen. My concern is why we're at where we're at today is because the elites have basically dominated the discourse. They have basically imposed this new morality from on high. They've co-opted the media in the process. I mean, there's virtually not a film that comes out of Hollywood today that doesn't trumpet, the pros of, gay marriage or homosexual relationships. You can't even watch The Walking Dead anymore without having a gay character pop up on screen without really a theme that goes along with it. And I guess what we have to do is we got to stand up, because if we don't, what's the end result of this?
The end result of it will be that Christian and traditional Jewish and even Muslim sexual morality will be essentially illegal. It will be the equivalent of white racism. And I think the black churches need to speak up and say, I'm sorry, there's a big difference between Jim Crow laws and laws that distinguish between heterosexual and homosexual behavior. There is fundamentally no difference between white people and black people. There is a fundamental difference between homo and heterosexual activity. One reproduces the human species, the other doesn't. So comparing gays to blacks or other persecuted ethnic minorities is an outrageous falsehood, and it's one that I think a lot of African Americans are offended by. But that is the tool that's being used. And if you think about how many open white supremacists do you hear about? How many white supremacist schools are there? How many people who say they're white supremacists are able to function in public or corporate life? Well, the fate of the Ku Klux Klan and the Branch Davidians and the Aryan Nations, that's the fate that gay activists have in mind, for Christians. They want us to be as marginalized and as insignificant as white supremacist hate groups. And they're using the same logic. They're going to use the same laws. And if we're not careful, Christianity will be as disgraceful in America as white racism properly is. So I think every Christian in America has to think, is my religion the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan? That's what the media is saying.
Right, and then there's other historical examples too, right? I mean, there was a slandering of clergy in France that led to, there's a real connection between the vilification of people and the killing. And then you had the Turks. Why don't you give us a little bit of a historical lesson from a couple of centuries ago on what happens?
Yeah, when a dominant group wants to persecute a minority, the first thing they do is vilify them. And what you had the dominant secularists in France before the French Revolution spent about 20 years vilifying the Christian clergy. The moment they took power in the French Revolution, they started killing the Christian clergy. When the Turks decided that the Armenians were a dangerous minority 100 years ago, almost to the day, they started out with a propaganda campaign saying that the Armenians were all traitors working for the Russian Tsar. Within a few years, they were butchering them in the streets and driving them into the desert to die of thirst. The same thing happened in, of course, Nazi Germany. They vilified the Jews, preparing people for the Holocaust. You saw it happen again in Rwanda, where the once powerful Tutsi minority they were declared on government radio stations for weeks and weeks. They were called cockroaches. We must exterminate the cockroaches. It was repeated over and over and over again, and it was followed by a genocide that in the course of a month or two killed more than 1 million people. I think this vilification of faithful Christians could lead to violence in America. And I think the churches have been persecuted before. Church Christians are being persecuted all around the world by Islamists, and the U.S. government is doing nothing, of course. I think that I can imagine Americans standing by while churches are padlocked and pastors are arrested for being hate mongers, while children being taken away from their parents because they don't want them to be taught their extremist views. I mean, it's happened so many times before, and all the signs are there that the enemies of Christianity are seeing how much can we get away with. Can we even close down a pizza parlor for just theoretically being willing to discriminate? Can we get teachers from religious schools fired? How they're going to keep pushing until they hit pushback. And unless there's powerful pushback by Christians now, not 5 years from now when it will be too late, but now, we're going to see ourselves reduced to the status of second-class citizens the way Christians are in countries like Egypt and Syria.
You know, Chicago's Cardinal Francis George, this is part of your article that you put out last week, made the comment, quote, "I expect to die in my bed, my successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr in the public square." That's amazing. Did he offer any context to that at all?
Yeah, he pointed to the historical context, and he said something important after that. He said, and then once society has collapsed, as it will without God, and once things are in ruins, the church will be there to help put the pieces together again as it was after the fall of Rome. So I'm hoping we don't have to get to that point. But remember, I'd like to point out the church in Poland was persecuted savagely by the communist government. It endured, and it brought down communism. The church in China has been terribly persecuted, and yet now 10% of people in China identify as Christian. The power of the government, they can make us uncomfortable, they can kill a few of us, they can kill a lot of us, but they can't exterminate the gospel. We saw that in the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, the blood of the martyrs turned out to be the seed of the church. I really hope we don't get to that point, but we need to have ultimate confidence that we are on the side of eternity, and if we stand for eternity, history will be on our side in the long run.
Well, that's profound, and there is no doubt that we must make a stand at this point. It's just extraordinary to me to look at the history of this country and where we came from, the foundation of the country, many who came here seeking religious freedom, and then watching what's happened today where homosexual relations, rights, trump religious liberty. It's something that we got to change, and we got to take a stand now or it will be too late. John, I appreciate you being on the show. We'd like to have you back from time to time, and we look forward to the article that's going to come out this week that is a continuation of this subject. John Zmirak, thestream.org, thanks again.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Next, we have a mayoral candidate who's going to talk a little bit about the viral story on signs and her confrontation over this past weekend. Be back in just a few. Stay with us.